welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed lunch. And it is with great pleasure I get to invite Colin McKay of Google Canada to give us a keynote presentation on a topic that he will introduce.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. The title slide tries to say it all because you've got a pretty broad agenda. However, the way my talk will be structured, oh dear Lord, I caused a problem here. I'm glad you have that graduate degree to handle this. Two of them. Sorry about that, hotel. The way I'm going to try and deal with this is I'm going to speak to, in general terms, how Google approaches both the process of innovation internally as well as how we see our tools and services blending into innovation more broadly written in Canadian economy and Canadian society, with some particular drill down on artificial intelligence. And about 2/3 of the way through the conversation, I'm going to speak about our recently released artificial intelligence principles, because I think they give you a bit of insight into how a company trying to grapple with innovation at the really bleeding edge of technology is trying to work through the social impact of the tools and the processes that we're working with. And then close off with some practical observations about where we see interesting work happening in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning being applied to Canada's economy and some of its impacts for the future. I've written a speech here, which I'm going to be staring at and speaking from. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be making a lot of eye contact, but I'm going to try and be very sociable and every once in a while look up. I was really conscious that that's a boring experience. So I created a visual set of entertainment for you. It's not related to what I'm going to speak about, except in the most broadest way in terms of technological disconnection and technological surprise. Who here is familiar with the angry girlfriend meme? Okay. So the angry girlfriend meme is, let me go over here. I'm going to have to do this. Is this meme. So the concept is, scuzzball sees another woman on the street, and his girlfriend is very angry. And this has been reinterpreted for any social and political context over the 6 months that it's been popular. This is part of a series of stock photos by a Spanish photographer who has used these 3 actors in hundreds of different photos, in hundreds of different situations. So that is the entertainment you're going to have while I speak. So here's the previous iteration of this relationship where the girlfriend was upset by the scuzzball boyfriend. So, you know what? Funny thing is, this guy doesn't show up anymore in any of the other stock imagery. So as you'll see, Tom in the back's going to be clicking for the people on the web, but this is just meant for visual stimulation as I speak. So I've been asked to speak to you about how Google's planning for disruptive innovation and how this will impact the future workforce over the coming 5 to 10 years or more. And I understand from Taylor that you've had some conversation where you might be a little dismissive about trying to map out that far into the future. The challenge for us, as I'll describe, is that as a company, we're hiring for skill sets that we need right now, but skill sets that and employees that can be adaptable into the future. So for us, the challenge is immediate application, but continued growth and learning over a rapidly evolving technological landscape. And this isn't new. As technology has advanced, of course, society has always had to adjust and adapt, but these advances have generally led to better, safer, more fulfilling occupations. For example, the 20th century brought about incredible changes to the way we work and live. There was the combustion engine, the telephone, stop me if you've heard this, the assembly line, and of course, the internet. The Brookfield Institute in Toronto recently gave us one data point about this, the potential for change. 46% of the work activities in Canada have the potential to be touched by automation across all industries. This is equivalent to 7.7 million jobs being affected by automation in one way or another. This isn't replaced, this is being affected. This is everything from a modernized assembly line and an auto plant through to a retail experience that's very different because of self-checkouts. Today, artificial intelligence and machine learning is expected to bring similarly profound changes as these technological shifts from the past century. It's still very early days, and at this point, it's impressive you can make computers a little less dumb and a little more useful. Unfortunately, there's no secret sauce to divine what skills will be needed for tomorrow's jobs and how to best retrain a workforce to master them. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the fundamental change we've had to go through as a company at Google to handle this sort of technological change. It's certain that spreading digital skills will, if nothing else, move individuals closer to skill sets that are likely to remain useful for the foreseeable future and get them used to retraining as a way to adapt to a new economic and industrial context. We've been working for years all around the world to help individuals and entrepreneurs acquire and develop some of the digital skills that will be critical for tomorrow's jobs. We have digital skills programs that help individuals across the world learn or improve critical skills. And they go by many names in Italian, German, French, Mandarin, but they have one common goal: to help individuals not only identify opportunities, but build the skills to find a place in the new economy. And importantly for the people in the room, this means working with partners at every stage of education, and even more importantly, well after they've entered the workforce. Because as we all know, community colleges play a powerful role in creating economic opportunities for learners and workers by providing broad access to post-secondary education with real practical application. And I will underline real practical application. At the tail end of today, I'll mention some fields that are seeing impact from the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence, as well as access to fast computing and network connections. Now, I've got some numbers. They're based on the US workforce, but I think they're generally relevant to any industrialized country. In the States, between now and 2024, there will be 16 million openings for what are called middle-skilled jobs. Those that require more education and training than a high school diploma, but less than a 4-year college degree. And these middle-skilled jobs, especially digital-based ones, are growing 2.5 times faster and offer 18% higher wages than their counterparts. This means community college certificates. This means, in the American context, associate degrees. It means, once again, practical application. Despite financial constraints, we find that the innovative nature and adaptability of community colleges makes them well positioned to meet the training needs for aspiring tech professionals. And for a company like Google, when I say tech professionals, I mean everyone from the person who provides IT support to a customer of ours who's both using our cloud-based software and services, or they're buying our ad products, or they're putting their sites and their business on one of our services, through to the sort of software engineer and software engineering manager that works at a larger company that's using our platforms to develop their own applications and our own services and deliver them to their customers. So there's a very wide continuum of tech workers within the context of how we relate to the learning experience, both early career and all the way through the career. Last month, just as an example, we announced the expansion of what we call an IT support professional certificate. We're working with 20 community colleges across the States with highly interactive content to provide certificates for IT support. This is the sort of qualification that doesn't require a college degree, but requires prior experience. You can't walk into a role, whether a small office or a big office, and not understand networking tools and not understand the impact of your work on the productivity of the broader office. And this bridges that gap where the learner needs the training and experience to get the job in tech. And it also bridges the gap because it's not early on in a career. It could be mid-career, it could be late career. It's relatively simple skill sets as long as you're able to learn them and develop from them. But you need some sort of structured program in order to bridge into a new career. And we're seeing similar initiatives from other internet companies. Facebook has a new digital marketing certificate, and Apple is developing curriculum for 30 schools across the US based on their own programming language. And here in Canada, Shopify is working with, I think it's Carleton, on a very practical co-op program to effectively train their employees to immediately start working as they're finishing their post-secondary education. But importantly, we're not just talking about simple tech skills. And I was speaking to some people earlier, and I mentioned how I worked at Industry Canada 15 years ago when the Allen Rock innovation agenda came out. And then in subsequent years, we've always identified that Canada has a challenge in that we educate scientists and we educate business specialists, but we haven't somehow managed to develop the crossover where one of those streams can manage the other of those streams, whether it's business people that understand science and understand the implications of managing within that context, or scientists that are able to bridge into commercialization. And what we're seeing in the world of applied artificial intelligence is that Canada is really great at educating, so I'm going to flip slides here. There you go. Canada's really great at educating theoretical artificial intelligence researchers. We're world leaders in that space. But where we have a gap is people who have finished a master's degree in computer science who can take machine learning and apply it to business challenges, who can interpret the practicalities of machine learning and artificial intelligence and use that in a business context to drive product development, to drive business growth, to map out strategies for the future based on that data analysis. So how does Google as a company and as a community, importantly, prepare for disruptive innovation? It starts with our culture, and unfortunately, there's no definitive list of Google innovation principles. I did some heavy searching and I found 6 different senior executives lists of 7, 9, 15, and 18 different principles that separately they communicated to their teams over the past 10 years. There are no posters around our campus with innovation-oriented slogans. No hang in there with the cat on the ladder sort of thing. But let me rephrase that a bit, because importantly, there are posters. There are plenty of them, and you can find them in every toilet in every one of our offices. Because what we do is constant reinforcement on skills and learning within the company. So we have 2 programs called Learning on the Loo and Testing on the Toilet. And they're posters that sit in plastic holders that are there permanently behind the door in the toilet. And Learning on the Loo concentrates on softer skills, so whether it's management or it's emotional quotient or it's dealing with other Googlers or it's work-life balance. And then Testing on the Toilet details technical issues and solutions. And by technical issues, I mean there's code. There's a page of code that's explaining exactly how to run a test on one of our new products or services. If you ask 10 Googlers around a campus what makes us innovative, you might get 10 different answers. But we still manage to encourage innovation across all our product areas, even our internal units. At Google, innovation can't be owned or ordained, but we try to create an environment where it'll evolve organically. And that's what we've done in Silicon Valley, in Waterloo, in Montreal, in Munich, in Hyderabad, and in Tokyo. Create an environment where people who want to be innovative have the direction and freedom to do so. And the key to this approach is ambition. We aim for 10 times change, not 10% change. It's often easier to make something 10 times better than it is to make it 10% better. And that means because when you're working on make things 10% better, you inevitably focus on the existing tools and assumptions, on building on top of an existing solution that many people have already spent a lot of time thinking about. And such incremental progress is driven by extra effort, extra money, and extra resources. But the 10 times model of thinking starts with picking a big problem, something huge, long existing, or on a global scale, and articulating a radical solution, one that would actually solve the problem if it existed, and often a product or service that sounds like it's directly out of a sci-fi story. And finally, and most importantly, there needs to be some concrete evidence that a proposed solution is not quite as crazy as it first seems. Something that justifies at least a close look at whether such a solution could be brought into being if creativity, passion, and persistence were brought to bear on it. This evidence could be some breakthrough in science, technology, or engineering that could actually make the solution possible within the next decade or so. So that's the window we're working in, is a decade and 10x. Importantly, there's also a tolerance for failure. And it's a tolerance for failure with learning built in. So I don't think it's apocryphal, but when I joined the company 7 years ago, at my training, they mentioned a story where at that point, Larry Page was still the CEO and Sergey Brin was the president. And if you were launching a new product, you went to a product review with Larry and Sergey before the final switch was flipped. And this team who had been working on this project for X amount of months and had invested $50 million in the project, explained it to them, and Sergey looked at them and said, well, you know what? Great, I'm glad you invested the time. I don't think it's going to work, but go ahead and launch it, and then just fail fast and take your learning from it, and just use that to build into the next iteration of the product and the service. And that's often repeated within the company. It's a matter of course. And importantly, the process of failure is not one of abandonment. The process of failure is institutionalized with what we call postmortems, which are full reports on what exactly went wrong, what went well, and what can be replicated and what can be avoided in order to instruct further development in the product, the service, the team. So speaking of 10x, for example, working with medical specialists, we've developed an algorithm to predict heart attacks and strokes simply from images of the retina. No needle or blood draw required. We're also helping doctors diagnose diabetic retinopathy, a leading and preventable cause of blindness. I want to underline, one of our key researchers, Jeff Hinton in Toronto, often talks about medical radiology. And he talks about the transformation of medical radiology through the use of artificial intelligence in analyzing imagery. And the key here isn't that artificial intelligence is going to replace radiologists. What it's doing in the tests that he's run is giving radiologists more of their time back, because machine learning based on a corpus of decades of analysis by radiologists on images allows us to narrow down that small wedge of radiology results that are unclear, that either can benefit from applied machine learning for greater analysis and identification of tumors or other elements, that can then be referred back to the radiologist for their expert opinion. And it's a transition from being able to identify tumors in 92% of images to 95%. And that's the space we're working in. The space we're working in is machine learning provides that last little tweak, but it also needs that expert insight, both in terms of training the algorithms that feed into the machine learning process, but also in the analysis of the outcomes. So, other 10x projects, you've probably heard of our self-driving cars, and less likely, but you may have heard about our attempt to deliver internet by balloon. So, it's called Loon. You can look it up. It's, once again, crazy idea. As a Canadian, I heard Project Loon, and I'm like, dear God, may this have some relation to Canada. Here's a more routine example, and this relates more to an industrial economy. In 2014, Google acquired DeepMind, which is a London startup that focuses on cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence. And who here's heard of DeepMind or AlphaGo? Get down to Thomas in the back. Okay. And so AlphaGo is a computer program that plays the incredibly complex game of Go. And at its heart, artificial intelligence is computer programming that learns and adapts. It can't solve every problem, but it has a potential to improve our lives in a profound way. But what DeepMind also started working on was the operation of our data centers, which is an incredible sunk cost for us with environmental impact. And one of the primary sources of energy use in the data center environment is cooling. Just as your laptop generates a lot of heat running programs, our data centers, which contain our servers powering all the popular Google services, generate a lot of heat that must be removed to keep the servers running. And this cooling is typically accomplished via large industrial equipment like pumps, chillers, and cooling towers. So DeepMind researchers started working with Google's data center team to improve the use of the multiple systems in a data center, using a neural network to train on different operating scenarios and parameters within these data centers, drawing on the thousands of sensors within the data center and the historical data that we had collected about operation, data such as temperatures, power, pump speeds, set points, and using it to train an ensemble of neural networks. The result was that this machine learning process was able to consistently achieve a 40% reduction in the amount of energy used for cooling, which equates to a 15% reduction in overall power usage effectiveness after accounting for things like electrical losses and other non-cooling efficiencies. What that meant was millions of dollars of savings for every data center, and then a significant impact on the environment, a significant effect on the environmental impact for each of these data centers, simply by running machine learning processes against the data that we were already collecting and optimizing our usage of these systems. If this was a more traditional PowerPoint, I'd show you a very impressive deck with a graph that shows power usage that goes up here near the 80th percentile. As soon as you turn on the machine learning model, it drops off a cliff. And then once you turn the machine learning model back off, it goes straight back up. That's the level of impact, and it's the level of rather pedestrian implementation of machine learning with a very real impact, both in a public policy sense as well as simply an industrial sense. Now, at Alphabet, which is the broader umbrella company that includes Google, we have 5 AI labs in Canada, 2 in Montreal, 2 in Toronto, and 1 in Edmonton, doing similar things, but DeepMind is in Montreal and Edmonton, and our Google Brain team is in Montreal and Toronto, and then we also have our Google Cloud team has an AI team in Waterloo. We're attracting the leading minds in the field back to Canada, and importantly, we're building teams around them. And we're not just building researchers, we're building those engineers that know how to apply the insights from machine learning to operational concerns, to customer concerns. And we use AI to make these products more useful, from email that's spam-free and easier to compose. Has anyone here used Smart Reply in Gmail? Have you seen that? Yeah, so Gmail starts to suggest to you phrases that sound eerily similar, like something you'd say to give you a shortcut, especially on your phone. To a digital assistant you can speak to naturally, to photos that pop the fun stuff out for you to enjoy. But we're also using AI to help people tackle urgent problems. And this is part of the learning process, back to skills development. Because what we're seeing, thanks to open sourcing of artificial intelligence tools like TensorFlow and online courses that give basic instruction on how to use machine learning in any context, we've got high school students that are building AI-powered sensors to predict the risk of wildfires. Farmers are using it to monitor the health of their herds. Doctors are using AI to diagnose cancer and prevent blindness. And these clear benefits are why we invest heavily in AI research and development, and also why we make these tools open source and provide open source code to encourage the application. So let's back up for a second, because I just mentioned herds. So who here has heard of a company called Cowlar, C-O-W-L-A-R? No? Okay. You can go ahead and search for it. There's some funny pictures. It's Fitbit for cows. And there's another product called EmbediVet, which is slightly more touchy because it involves subcutaneous implantation. But the basic idea is you collect data about your cow herds and movement, location, temperature, and that gives a farmer a detailed report on the behavior and the condition of each cow, which can be important if one of them starts to show the signs of illness or if the herd begins to avoid one part of their grazing land. It signals that otherwise you'd be riding an ATV or a horse around with your herd all day long trying to figure out what's wrong with the individual or the group. But once again, it's data collection, simple application, and data analysis. It's also importantly, it's an implementation in agriculture that 10, 15 years ago you wouldn't have thought through. I'm often asked about the application of advanced technology and artificial intelligence in Canada, and the assumption that it's the tech industry that's leading the edge, where in fact some of the most data-intensive jobs are on farms and in mines, right? So it's an esoteric but important work, And the keys are threefold: cheap and compact processing power, access to high-power computing systems, and the insight delivered by machine learning. So let's back up a little more. I've been at Google for just over 7 years, and in the time I've been with the company, we've been through two transformative phases. And this is an observation about back to systemic and ambitious change rather than incremental change. The first was the move to mobile. So as mobile phone technology became cheaper, more powerful, and as the networks they relied on became faster, we saw that many of our users were accessing our services through their mobile devices. And this isn't a simple transition. There's a lot of space on a desktop screen to do stuff and to screw up your presentation of your service. And you can use 8 fingers and 2 thumbs to signal the computer on what you want and to control your interface. But once you move to your phone, that changes significantly. In terms of the speed of change in this technology, we've been through 8 generations of the Android operating system for mobile devices since I joined the company. That's 8 complete new generations of this underlying operating system. And it's a really different experience, as you all know, using a small mobile balanced in the palm of your hand. You know, we were all worried about carpal tunnel syndrome in our thumb because that's what we use to control the phone. And that means as a company, we had to understand how our users were interacting with our services on these devices. We had to redesign screens, menus, even the hardware itself to make it as painless and useful as possible. And that meant rebuilding services that were being used by billions of people on the fly without them noticing. And importantly, retraining the entire company to think about mobile first. So people in the space of 6 to 8 months had to go from, I'm building for desktop with a mobile extension, to the assumption is mobile first and desktop is a poor cousin. And that's the transition that's accelerated. But even more startlingly is 2 years later, we refocused as interest accelerated across industry, academia, and society on machine learning. And again, this is powered by the availability of cheaper, faster, and more powerful computing resources. And this time it wasn't focused on mobile computing, but on the vast scale of computation that be accomplished with distributed computers on superfast networks. So this became a node for you to access supercomputers on a very fast network. And what that meant was we had, once again, had to get all of our engineers to retrain to understand machine learning, how it applied to their software needs, to their products, their services, and to redesign how we interacted with the user. The most significant application of this, or rather representation of this, is Google Assistant, through which you can now use your phone to control any one of your services, ask any questions, do immediate translation. And that's an extension of implementing machine learning across all of our services. And think about that. So this is Google in the span of 7 years. We've gone through 2 fundamental reevaluations of how we approach our services and our products for our users, with retraining across the company. And that's the level of investment that has to happen. She's always surprised. This is that has to happen when we're facing this pace of innovation and challenge. Let me see here. I'm conscious we've got about half an hour left, right? Okay. So, and I'm sure we have questions, so let me make sure that I'm... So companies working in artificial intelligence should aim to solve for people's happiness, including housing, security, and health. And artificial intelligence should not only change the nature of work, but the quality of our lives, both inside and outside of work. And that's an important point to dwell on, which is as we're talking about skills and retraining for the workforce of the future, just like there were aspirations that, whether it was assembly lines 100 years ago or the introduction of cars in a broad-based way 90 years ago, that would open up leisure time for workers and for society written more broadly. And to some extent, work-life balance discussion aside, it has. But it's important for people to have fulfilling work, but this shouldn't mean longer working hours. So for us, technology itself is not inherently good or bad, but the key is ethical deployment and open development. And that's so people can see what code is being developed, make suggestions, and try to predict outcomes. So I mentioned I was gonna dwell on AI, but I'm gonna skip over it so that we have longer time for conversation. In the last 2 weeks, we've released a set of artificial intelligence principles that reflect how we as a company have been tackling with the challenge artificial intelligence will pose not just to the workforce of the future, but to society, and what our responsibilities are as a company, as individual employees and members of society, to delivering artificial intelligence powered technology, software, and services to not just Canadians, but communities around the world. And we have 7 principles. One is AI should be socially beneficial. So the ambition that I spoke of earlier should extend into the application of artificial intelligence, and it should have a concrete impact and reflect a broad range of social and economic factors. It should avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. This is key to understanding where data comes from, how algorithms and the machine learning process analyze, interpret that data, and then recognizing when outcomes vary from the mean and outcomes deliver unintended or unfavorable results. It should be built and tested for safety. So for us, that's safety and security practices to avoid unintended results that create risks of harm. It should be accountable to people. So there should be appropriate opportunities for feedback, relevant explanations, and appeal. It should incorporate privacy design principles. We can dive into that for 45 minutes if you'd like. It should uphold high standards of scientific excellence, which is key to us as a company. And it should be made available for uses that accord with these principles. So for us, many technologies have multiple uses, and we will work to limit potentially harmful or abusive applications. Let's see. We've also made a broad-based statement that we're not going to design or deploy AI in application areas that cause or are likely to cause overall harm, where there's a material risk of harm, or where weapons or other technologies whose principal purpose or implementation is to cause or directly facilitate injury to people, or technologies that gather or use information for surveillance violating internationally accepted norms. And then for technologies whose purpose contravenes widely accepted principles of international law and human rights. These are some pretty strong baselines. We've had some really strong internal debate over the past few months about this. You're nodding your head because you know what I'm talking about. We're very proud of them because it sets a baseline moral framework for this conversation around innovation and skills development in a space that's evolving rapidly. So let's return to the pace of change that we must deal with. So I mentioned AlphaGo, the program that revolutionized the application of machine learning to games. And there's a new iteration of AlphaGo called AlphaGo Zero. That was, we published articles on it in the late fall. So previous versions of AlphaGo initially trained on thousands of human amateur and professional games to learn how to play the game. AlphaGo Zero skips this step and learns to play simply by playing games against itself, starting from completely random play. So we're moving from a model where you've got human interaction and examples in order to train on to the computer learning against itself, this is a magnitude improvement in most of the relevant numbers for AlphaGo Zero compared to those of the version of AlphaGo that defeated the champion Lee Sedol a year ago. What that means is AlphaGo Zero learned how to play the game at a master level in 4.9 million training games, not the 30 million training games that it took AlphaGo. And this is a part that I want to underline. AlphaGo Zero got to this level after 3 days of training, so 3 days of the computers running and running simulations against itself. AlphaGo took months. And this is the most important part because I mentioned the transition to mobile. And when you think through how technology is going to change how we both approach the skills we will need to identify future job opportunities, but also career training over a 20, 30, 40, 50-year career path, is the AlphaGo Zero runs on a single machine that has 4 specialized computing units called tensor processing units that are built to process our TensorFlow programming language, artificial intelligence, applied to data-driven challenges. So that's one machine with 4 TPUs. AlphaGo ran on multiple machines with 48 TPUs. So in a year and a half, we went from, here's a big box, we're going to leave it for months, and the box will come back, and it will have mastered the game, and it's still a very expensive box, and it costs a lot of electricity, to here's this box, and it took it 3 days. And it's figured it out, and it's going to take humans months or years to analyze how the algorithm in the system truly mastered the game. This is the speed of technological change we're dealing with. What does this mean for Canadian workers? So we're going to expect that some jobs will be displaced, like they were with textile manufacturing and farming in previous centuries. But there will be jobs we can't even imagine yet. So think through the skilled work of flight crews before commercial air travel, or network-enabled cars that speak to mechanics at the dealerships when they need service. How about first responders with knowledge at their fingertips to save more lives in emergencies by using smart maps that can reroute through damaged roads, or reference documents that can help them identify injuries? Product designers who grow designs by creating algorithms that produce personalized designs for each customer. Cobot workers, people working alongside robots designed to physically interact with them, so together they can do complex tasks that neither could do as well alone. How about improvements in assisted elder care, where as our population ages, machine learning may free up just enough people to provide care and help with care itself. Think back to those examples about medical testing I mentioned, and how that would change the interaction between someone in elder care with their medical professionals. For example, a nurse might be able to help 4 hours a day, but people still need help for the other 20. And this process of change will take many years to unfold. Automation will likely happen gradually. And for the most part, specific tasks will be automated, not entire jobs. For example, in drug discovery, labs may automate testing millions more potential molecules, but ultimately biochemists will investigate the most viable ones. In fact, if we consider demographic trends, this means over the next 25 years, the biggest problem may not be a lack of work, but a lack of workers. And we may need automation to, it says keep up productivity here, but as a Canadian, I should probably replace it with improve productivity. And this challenge is larger than one company or government can solve. As I mentioned earlier, with some of our work in STEM education, both at the primary and then secondary and post-secondary level, we recognize that we need to work together on programs that help people make a living and find meaning in their work, including in a new generation of jobs enhanced by machine learning. Going forward, we could design technology that works well with people, that helps them to come up with ideas for how to use machine learning to build and apply it, to complement people. Machine learning is good at making predictions in predictable circumstances, so it's great for automating and accelerating the more repetitive parts of today's jobs. But it'll likely be decades before machine learning systems can perceive the kind of social and cultural nuances that people use to make reasoned judgments, never mind providing the human touch. So machine learning will tend to appear in tools that empower people, just as spreadsheets replaced calculators, the human calculator, not accountants. For those who want more social, creative, and unpredictable tasks that they don't have time to explore today, machine learning should help. It's not a job loss we should be concerned about, but whether jobs might become duller or more stressful or less fulfilling. We can help grow opportunities for engaged creative work. We have a researcher in artificial intelligence in Montreal who's actually working with David Usher on applying machine learning and AI to creativity in music, and trying to find new ways for David and other artists to express themselves using machine learning, which is really interesting work. It's really experimental, but that's one of the ambitions and the delights of leading edge technology. So for us, the key factor will be ensuring that Canadian economies will be able to make the best of what's to come. That means supporting digital skills education, as this is likely to remain valuable on the jobs market for the next decade at least. Supporting entrepreneurs so that when opportunities for new types of jobs arise, local innovators can seize upon them to create successful businesses. And this means everything from understanding the application of digital skills to their business, through to being able to acquire the technology or the services to implement it, through to the extension of their markets based on insights from applying technology. And then experimenting, and experimenting is not really the right word, but I think we still haven't found an easy solution, with large-scale retraining of adult workforces and with renewed social safety nets, which are two areas which could help societies cope in the event that there is indeed a decrease in available jobs. So I've left us about 15 minutes for Q's and A's. And I think, just to sum up, as a Canadian, I'm very optimistic. We are at the leading edge of artificial intelligence research, and we're implementing database decision making and machine learning across a number of different industries. That gives us a lot of experience and a lot of opportunity, both domestically and globally. We still have this tough nut to crack, which is how exactly do we create a system that incorporates both business-directed and science-inspired innovation as well as management, because that will be the hurdle for us to remain competitive in this space. Because especially in the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's intense competition, whether it's from France, whether it's from China, whether it's from the United States. We just recently opened another AI lab in Nigeria to grow out these skill sets. And these individuals are highly mobile, especially at the leading edge. Those leading edge researchers need a reason, both in terms of a challenge as a project, as well as a community that welcomes them and supports them. And we have an advantage now, but we need to figure out how to integrate those advances in research and science into our overall training and education framework. So thanks very much. I still have many more pictures. Surprised at everything. Nope, sorry, happy. A lot of pointing too. So, and it's not by coincidence that I think she's looking at an Android phone the entire time. So the final one is, I intended to speak for a long time. There you go. So I'm open to any questions that people may have. I don't know quite how it works online, but.
Thank you. I'm going to paraphrase Stephen Hawking when he was asked what's the thing that scares him most, and he said the thing that scares him most and should scare the whole human race is artificial intelligence. So I'm just wondering how you react to that.
I think we're still in an incremental phase where it's application to tasks, and that's part of the reason why we've made this concerted effort to develop principles, so that as people see us investing in research and then implementing it in our services, that they know there's a moral framework around how we're making decisions. But it's just a baseline, because it addresses that concern, right? The concern is not how artificial intelligence makes our searches easier, but what will it look like in 20 or 30 years when you have fully interactive constructions, right? And both we and other companies working in this space are just starting the research around the ethical and moral frameworks around the implementation of artificial intelligence. So we've seen some very tense conversations, especially in the United States in the past few months, that have reflected that pressure. So it's an appropriate observation, though. So.
Hi. I wanted to know, what do you see that in your Google University, if there are some high in-demand skills that you are developing today and that you know that in the next 5 years will no longer be as in demand as they are today?
If I'm thinking of Google specifically, it's developing training programs that focus on today's version of technology, whether that's a programming language or that's an implementation. And what we're having to do is we're having to build out, we're both having to hire and then train for both iterations and then transformation in skill sets, right? So it's much like 20 years ago, if you were a COBOL programmer from the 1970s, you discovered you could make $150,000 a year because of the Y2K problem. You know, you may not have worked on your computer science skills in 15 years, but for that one brief period, you were in high demand. For us, it's making sure that we have a workforce that's able to not only make the transition in their skill sets, but be able to identify in advance that they need to make the transition. And that's not just driven by the employee, that's driven by management as well, right? And that's driven by the manager of the employee identifying that there's a task coming up that requires new skills, but also the organization investing the money and giving the mission to encourage and in fact force a redirection of effort. Sorry, it sort of answers, but you know.
Embedded in your company that really looks at what are the tasks that are really evolving, and then what are the skills associated, and which one we need to develop more than others?
Well, I think one of the advantages we have is that whether you're talking about large-scale distributed computing, so the ability to run data centers around the world that provide services, we were the pioneers in that. So the engineers that we had inside the company when we were only 20 or 30 or 50 people are still the pioneers in that space. So they understand that technology well enough that they could see the challenges developing and identify that there needs to be a redirection. But those same people are also the ones that recognize that our users were moving to mobile, that we could see in our data from our customer usage and from our service usage that we needed to completely restructure how we delivered services to our users. And those are the same leaders that as we started experimenting with as machine learning and artificial intelligence became cheaper because of the broader availability of cheap processing, that we would be able to implement it in a much more thorough way across the company, and then turn the entire company around to focusing on those challenges. So it's both employees who are able to make the switch and learn a new application of their skill set, but also management that identifies that and supports it wholeheartedly through the process and drives that process of change in, I wouldn't say a severe way, but a very directed way. It's an existential threat, right? Those were existential threats for the company. You need to make the transition to mobile, and oftentimes that process of change is more inspirational or aspirational, right? And there isn't the recognition that there is an existential problem there.
It's online.
Yeah.
So whenever you're ready, go ahead. Eliza, can you please text me the question and I'll ask? We're not hearing you very well.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's an Apollo 13 situation.
Yeah, I've got a few queued up, so I'll pass the mic around in here.
Hello? Okay, you can hear me. So you were talking about the disruptive technologies of today.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as the disruptive technologies of the future? I know we're kind of predicting here a little. And in 10 years' time, and how do we train for those? You know, because the training now is for the disruptive technologies of the future.
Well, we have a challenge in that we're not training for the needs of today, right? We're not training for that transition for mid-career workers who are moving from an industrial assembly line model to one that's much more flexible, right? So that's an immediate challenge. I mean, a lot of the disruptive technologies of 10 years from now are already on the horizon. So, you know, to your question about artificial intelligence and implementation, the ability to understand machine learning, whether in an industrial or service context, like I mentioned in car dealerships and car maintenance. That's going to be a skill set that evolves from reading a display through to being able to reprogram on the fly, right? At the same time, there's going to be integration of robotics and applications of artificial intelligence, whether it's through self-driving cars or it's through self-driving garbage trucks, or the application of machine learning to to heating and air conditioning systems, right? So over the 10-year window, it's still incremental, but it's incremental in a substantial way that requires a focus on continuous skills development, which is my point about inside Google, where it's in continuous skills development. It's everything from the sheets of paper behind the toilet door all the way through to, we have an internal learning corpus that's both self-driven as well as instructor-driven online and in person, to encourage that self-directed learning, but self-directed with frameworks. So, I mean, a little bit of detail. When I go into our learning corpus, I can identify my role, and it will identify, according to my role, my experience, and my level within the company, supplemental work for my immediate functions, as well as areas that I should be exploring. And then we also, in terms of learning about machine learning and artificial intelligence, it isn't just a deep dive for engineers or technical specialists. We have those courses, multi-course packages for people in more social or more general business applications as well. So
within your company, you're looking at learning pathways customized for an individual, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So that's something interesting to think about because,
Yeah, and it's also, importantly, is the recognition for both your individual and managerial responsibility for those pathways is baked in that as a manager, I can go and review what my employee has done in terms of self-directed learning, as well as learning that's integrated into a career plan we discussed, as well as learning that has been identified by our human resources partners or by our engineering leaders that should be taken by a broader subsection of the company, right? And there's clear signaling there as well. So it's not directionless, it is guided in some way. So.
thank you.
And our question from online is, how do you see the government's role evolving in this changing environment?
There's a real challenge in that for us, you know, we think nationally, we think globally, and both here and in the United States and elsewhere, when we look at supporting STEM education initiatives, whether after school or whether in primary or post-secondary, having to work with multiple partners and having to work with multiple partners and with different curricula and different framework make it very difficult when we have a pretty clear idea of what we need as a company, as an industry. And that's a real challenge, which is, what's that coordinated approach? And I know everyone in this room is trying to tackle this, so I'm not minimizing the investment you're putting into this. But that's the reality for me as a public policy person is, okay, how do we get better at signaling this translation into lifelong learning, and then signaling the changes that are necessary through the educational system to move coding programs from once on the weekend or in the afternoon into the curricula, and not just as an element in your day, but as an element in each of your disciplines, right? Because as I've been emphasizing, if you're talking about coding or machine learning, it's not a technical skill, it's integrated into, I keep doing that, sorry. It gets integrated into your process of discovery and insight throughout your disciplines, right? And then there's a broader base challenge, which is we're going to have periods of transition across generations based around both periods where they will not be earning consistent amounts of money as they reskill or as the economy goes through a transition. So whether, you know, the example I've talked with several people about is the idea that in a gig economy, you're making enough money to sustain a style of living, but all it takes is losing one of those gigs to push you off a precipice, right? But our existing income support models and social support models don't take that into account, right? They always look for what's your big T4, what's your big paycheck. You know, they take the signals from the old industrial model of earning income and supporting yourself. And then later on, the transition for mid-career, people my age who have been working in a very traditional career path, is there a path for them that is fulfilling and then maintains a traditional career path? Do we have to plan for something that is more, I don't know how to express this, gives them purpose, but may feel like it has less significance than what they were doing in the past because the process of transition has eclipsed their career path. You know, are you 49 years old and reskilling is going to be incredibly hard, or 62? And then importantly, planning for a population that works well into its 80s. You know, I mean, the debate over when you take your CPP, to me, seems a little nonsensical that you're making the debate between 60, 62, 65, when the average life expectancy is going to be well into its 80s, and people are planning to work well into their 70s, right? So.
Thank you very much.
Rambling answers, sorry.
We're good, Taylor? We have 2 more questions in the room. I don't know if we have time for them, or?
We'll do 2 more questions on the floor.
Okay.
Maybe pose them if possible, one after each other, and then you
Sure.
can address them both.
Okay.
With the rapid development of AI and machine learning, inevitably it will lead to development of new products, new services, improvement of existing products and services. You're always in a perpetual cycle of change and innovation. So with that being said, like, how do you incentivize your workforce to change, to transform, and how do you overcome resistance so that your engineers, your workforce are constantly adapting and addressing this change? Because that is an issue with almost every organization. You know, the resistance to change starts with the workforce. They don't want to adapt. So how do you guys overcome that? So the fact that since 2011 you've had 8 iterations of the Android operating system, that tells me, and they're all new in a way, which is fantastic. So how do you guys do that?
Sorry, this is gonna be long, Taylor. It begins with hiring, and it begins with hiring for people that are both open to change and are willing to challenge how they perceive their role and they perceive their project they're working on, and they want to work on projects that are ambitious. So they're looking for a project that will evolve over time and could very well be cut or be exploded into something very different. And then institutionally, there's a very clear line of communication from the senior-most management all the way through about corporate mission, about the goals, and how importantly, as I mentioned, the moral and ethical frameworks around how we use our technology, and especially the social benefits of the technology to both our individual users as well as the community. There's that sense of ownership that drives a lot of our engineers and our staff to want to iterate and improve and to radically change their product lines. So we've built the company that way, and we've built it with a 2-way flow of information, right? So that you have both a clear understanding of where we want to go as a company and understanding of where we're going to invest in technology and where we're going to invest in experimental efforts. And that you are able to put your hand up and both criticize the direction we're going in, or to identify new pathways for innovation. You know, it's a very trite observation, but Gmail was a side of the table project by an engineer who just, as a 20% project, thought through the existing web-based mail services are garbage. Can I do something that's better, right? And so that's the sort of innovation we look for internally. In terms of an organization, that was the biggest distinction when I moved from the public service to Google was, and I'll be brutally honest here, was the transition from a top-down waterfall method of communication where less water hit you the farther down you were, and the less opportunity you had to interact with decision makers the farther down you were, to Google, where in my first week I saw Eric Schmidt, the then CEO, in the line at breakfast, 2 people ahead of me, and he was just talking to people. And then I went to a presentation where the CFO of the company was talking about our quarterly financials and taking questions from the room. And then the next day was a meeting, our weekly meeting, where our CEO and our president gave presentations and then took questions from the room and from an online door. So I went from 1 week from barely any information to the next week to, oh my God, like I've seen the senior leadership this far away from me. So it's a hard thing to change, and it's a challenge for government because government isn't built that way. But it needs to become a self-referential model, an internal model. So there's another one somewhere? Yep.
Yeah, and that note, it's a good segue. You said fail fast and learn from it. So what can we do as public servants or business owners to actually incorporate that type of thinking within our organizations?
So this is my my pet peeve. Back to both your questions marry up, because one of my enduring interests is, okay, how do you implement new approaches to conducting business in the public service and implement technology. And one of my pet peeves is that we're still in a model where we run pilot projects. And you run pilot projects because you can minimize risk, and you can clearly identify outcomes, and then you can build support among senior management because you've sandboxed this project, which then means that you've discounted the ambition and the overall impact. And we're slowly making a transition or moving beyond that small pilot project model. But the real challenge for the public service is you fail fast, you can't fail big. And the tolerance for failure is actually quite minimal as well, right? But I think incrementally, communicating more clearly what you expect the outcomes to be from your programs and services so that citizens and your management and politicians, parliamentarians, understand the ambition of what you're trying to do and see that there are clear measures for progression in that project. Help communicate that risk-taking a little more clearly and help identify metrics through which you can ask for more resources and greater investment by senior managers. I mean, political investment, right? But it's a much slower process because the programs are much broader and have much greater impact. However, the challenge is that at the same time that you're trying to deal with that different risk analysis model, your citizens are still consumers. So you're in a similar space to banks, where banks are risk adverse and have tremendous consequences if they get it wrong. But at the same time, if I can't do everything on this device, I'm switching banks, right? Because I've now moved to a world where this desktop experience no longer means anything to me, right? I want it on a convenient device, and in 2 years I'll want them to speak to me through my home assistant and have that virtual interaction. So you're in a real, it's not quite a catch-22, but it's a quandary because you still have to keep pace with technological change. No easy solution, sorry. You have my sympathy. Great.
Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation and vibrant slideshow.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have with us today Amy Mifflin-Sales of the Rito Hall Foundation, whose work on promoting innovation culture and lifelong learning is an important part of fostering digital skills and readiness for the workplace of tomorrow. And we have a small gift as a token of our appreciation for you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.